the day before yesterday, 14 civilians has been killed on a NATO raid in Nawzat district of Helmand province. 4 kids was also among these civilians. So why and what is your reaction about this?
Yeah, this is a very, very tragic, saddening story. And from an ISAF side, we have already issued apologies for this. The commander, Regional Command Southwest, General Toulan, US Army, on behalf of General Petraeus, issued these apologies last night, describing what has happened and admitting that we might be responsible for the death of innocent civilians. The situation evolved the day before yesterday, very typically in a counterinsurgency campaign. You need to know that these issues can be very, very complex and complicated. There was a partnered operation against insurgencies. There was a firefight. We lost a Marine, we lost a soldier. And then the force called in air support, and the aircraft dropped 2 bombs. And subsequently, we found out that civilian casualties were caused by this.
General, the Afghan people may complain about the tactics that you are using in these sort of the operations. During the night, you carried out these attacks. And then during the last 10 years, you might gain enough knowledge about how to conduct these operations, how to reduce the number of the casualties. But did you think the lesson has been learned or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have reduced the civilian casualties. That has been stated even by the United Nations Human Rights Report a couple of months ago. They clearly stated what also are our numbers, that we were able to drive down the number of civilian casualties caused by us around about 25%, because we do more, we are better, we are more conscious, and we do better training, whereas the number of civilian casualties caused by the insurgency went up by 35%. So as long as they use innocent Afghan civilians as human shields, and this is what has happened in Nawzat in Helmand province, these incidents can unfortunately happen, which is very, very tragic. And this is of course not part of our strategy. We are not targeting civilians. But this happened because the enemy of the Afghan people, used civilians as human shields.
General, the ordinary people, the people who are living in Nawzat districts, in other parts of Afghanistan, they may complain that Taliban or the people who have the authority, who have the power, who have the weapon and everything to threaten the people. And they use these areas, but because they don't have the power to ask the Taliban to do not use these areas to attack on NATO forces, because they are civilians. So in this case, from one side they are victims of the Taliban attacks, and other side they are also victims of your attacks as well.
Yeah, it's very complicated and complex, you're right. And people sometimes are frustrated, I can understand that. We are here to protect the Afghan population. And we are here with even more forces than ever before. Plus a grow up of the Afghan security forces. They have around about 290,000 soldiers and policemen right now. So we are better able to protect the people, but here and there, we find ourselves in fights, in ambushes. We find ourselves in situations where the insurgency even indiscriminately planned IEDs against, Afghan innocent people, workers, or people, women and children riding in a bus. We have seen that in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
But General, did you think, is it justified to protect, for the protection of your soldier lives, kill the other civilians?
It's not a question of justifying. It's sometimes very hard to find the right balance between going after the insurgents, protecting the people, and protecting ourselves. Sometimes it's very, very difficult. And let me give you an example of what we are doing. And I need to come back to a very, to a buzzword, which is night raids or night operations. In 85% of all the night operations, not a single shot is fired. The one and only operational pattern that costs, almost no civilian casualties or no civilian lives is night operations, because they are extremely, intelligence-driven on a high level. They are very precise, and they are always partnered. So in almost all these night operations, there is not a single civilian casualty. We carry out these operations by night in order to protect the people. If we would do that in daylight, this would be much more difficult and much more dangerous for the civilians.
But General, what went wrong with that particular incident in Nowzat district?
Yeah, again, as I just explained that, the insurgency is using civilians as human shields. They hide behind women and children. They hide in civilian compounds. And then they even count on, you know, an incident like this one because they can use it for their propaganda machine. So when that happens, unfortunately, which is really tragic, and we admit having made a mistake, but when that happens, they use it, they like really to use that for their propaganda purposes. And this is very bad again.
General, President Karzai strongly condemned that attack and asked NATO to stop all these night raids. So what's your reaction? And even the White House also issued a statement, and they mentioned that the present consideration is legitimate.
Yeah, right, so it is. And we do support President Karzai and this approach. And General Petraeus talked to him already. I think it is very important to note that without night operations, we would not have achieved the progress we have achieved, actually, because we are removing so many fighters and insurgent commanders from the battlefield that could not have been achieved by the application of conventional military force. So we really need night operations. Now, the point is that so far we are training and educated Afghan commando forces in order to make them able to carry out these operations themselves. And this is actually what we are doing. And over time, we have to develop our, joint partnership in a way that the Afghans do that.
But how much time it will take to train the
actually,
Afghan
that's actually happening already. We see conventional and special forces operations led by, and conducted by Afghan forces, by Afghan commanders. But we need some time in order to, come up with a very solid, a very well-trained force that can really do it over time. And this is all about transition again. By the end of 2014, which is the great aim, as we all know, I think we are able to actually hand over all these operations to the Afghans. And in other words, we do support President Karzai, actually.
Yeah. So what does it mean for you? You will stop the night raids or you will carry out these attacks?
Well, we will not stop night operations, but what we will do with even more force and more vigor is handing over the responsibility for night operations and for all other operations as well to Afghan forces who have a better cultural understanding and a better cultural awareness of what is going on. They know the language, they know the people, they better know how to deal with certain complex, sensitive situations. And I think over time this is actually kind of a recipe that we need to apply. And over time, Afghan forces will be and want to be able to take that over.
General, according to the UN report during the 2010, 2,777 civilians were killed, which according to the United Nations report, 75% of these civilians were killed by the Taliban attacks. But still, the number of the people who were killed by the ISAF and NATO forces in Afghanistan was very high.
It's still too high.
Absolutely. Still high. So the incident like what was happening in Nowzat 2 days ago, in Nuristan also, the collateral damage in Nuristan, which in a friendly firing, you also killed around 20 Afghan
Well, that is not confirmed, forgive me, but I have to step in this one. What we are getting on reports is very unclear, it's still very contradictory.
It's very difficult to
And we also need to then investigate, who is really responsible for that. So this case is not yet solved and clear.
But still there were also another incident in Afghanistan as well in recent days. How much you think it's damaging for the NATO and for the coalition forces in Afghanistan?
It is damaging. It is damaging to our cause. And I can understand that people is impatient and frustrated because we promised to protect the people. And we do protect the people. That's actually what we are doing. But this complex environment in a counterinsurgency campaign is such that unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to drive down the number of civilian casualties to an absolute minimum. Only 2 weeks ago, General Petraeus issued another tactical directive asking all commanders in the field, all soldiers, single, simple airmen, infantry, soldier, and whoever, of all nations, if you wish, to do the utmost possible in order to avoid civilian casualties. We have improved training, we have strengthened partnership, and so on and so forth. So the result is that we actually are doing better today, but we have to work very hard still in order to avoid things like the incident that happened in Navzat.
Yeah, General, for the Afghan people, the civilian casualties, especially the loss of the life of kids, it's very difficult. In Kunar, the 7 to 9 civilians were killed. Most of them were kids, and also in Navzat district, so 14 people killed. Most of them, 4 of them were kids.
Yeah.
So the most important thing for the Afghans is every time the ISAF came out or NATO came out with the apology, and they apologize for the death of the civilian, and then it's happening again and again. And then the Afghan president is also seem very frustrated about the civilian casualties, and it's definitely have a bad impact over the relation also between the international community forces and the Afghan government. So how much you think you take these things seriously?
Well, again, we take it seriously. We take all civilian casualties seriously. We provide information. We admit our mistakes, as we did this time. We improve training. We enhance the cultural awareness of our soldiers. We train them in using proportional means and measures. We need, from time to time, also simply, break contact with the enemy in order to avoid civilian casualties. So it's a kind of a restraint that we also need to apply in certain situations. And we have done better. We have driven down the civilian casualty number caused by us. But as I said, it's a very, very tough environment. It's not easy, and it takes a long time. But what I also like to say is that we need we also need to discuss civilian casualties and misbehavior and the criminality of the insurgency. We need to condemn their deeds as well. We need to put them also on the spot and ask them what they are doing. And obviously, and we have seen that last year already, they are not acting according to the so-called code of conduct that had been published by Mullah Omar. So this is just a ridiculous situation. Mullah Omar and his commanders were claiming that they have a special code of conduct in order to protect civilians, for example. But what they are actually doing, you can find out by looking at statistics.
Yeah, but General, as for the Afghan people concerned, that they think that you call them terrorists. So in some cases, Afghan government also call these sort of attacks, which is organized by the Taliban, a terrorist act. So you cannot ask them to be polite or to keep all these code of conducts in their mind. But the presence of the international community in Afghanistan, the presence of the international forces in Afghanistan is for the protection of the Afghan people.
Absolutely.
So if they get killed by the NATO forces, which they have the duty to protect them,
I concur.
Then what would be the case?
I concur. And again, this was a mistake. We admitted having done so. We issued apologies. We promised to do better, to improve training, to improve coordination with the Afghan side, to review tactical directives and our manuals and all the rest. We are very much aware of the sensitivity of this issue, and we are very much aware of the potential for damage to our common cause, and that drives us, and that sometimes it doesn't let us sleep because it is so important. And we clearly understand your president. We understand the families, particularly the families affected now in Helmand. But believe me, we try whatever we can in order to avoid this.
Also, I want to raise another issue with you, General. The changing of the tactics from the Taliban side. Now they are more focused on some military targets in recent days. They carried out attacks like on a Ministry of Defense, and then the Ministry of Defense Hospital in Kabul, and after that, the recent days, the incident in Takhar province, which the General Dawood and the police chief of the Takhar province was also killed. So it seems that these tactics are scripted very well, and they are very much focused, and they carried out these sorts of attacks successfully. So how much these type of attacks surprised you, General?
I'm not sure actually whether they have changed tactics. There is one thing they have actually changed, and this is turning more to attacks against soft targets, against civilians in buses, or against security companies or construction companies, as we have seen over the last 2 weeks. This is kind of a change, but when it comes to
some of the attacks on Ministry of Defense,
exactly.
Takhar
some of the attacks are, so to say, more of a traditional nature.
Even today, attack in Herat, which is carried out by the Taliban on the PRT team.
Yeah, so that's right. It's a mixture of, so to say, well-known, attack patterns and something new, as I said, turning against soft targets. It is not a surprise, particularly not in these days, because we actually expected them to fight back, because they have lost a lot last year, particularly in Helmand and Kandahar, where the security situation, due to all the reinforcements for NATO and the Afghans, has improved. So they try to regain what they have lost in Panjwai and in Arghandab, where Mullah Omar was born. It must be very painful for them to have lost control and influence over the population in these areas. So they try to come back. They try to do spectacular attacks, which they also can use for their propaganda purposes. So yes, that is something that does not surprise us. We have prepared for it. And we are not using only military means, conventional and special forces. We are also using, together with our Afghan partners, new instruments. For example, the build-up of the Afghan local police. There are already 6,000 Afghan local policemen in around about 40 sites all around the country.
Yeah, General,
and reintegration, if I may, very briefly, reintegration is moving forward very encouragingly. So in order to counter their attack, which we have expected, actually.
General, in some of the incident, Taliban used the Afghan army soldiers or officers to carry out these attacks. How much it is cause concern for you?
Well, actually, these incidents are somewhat concerning, but if you put it into relation, in relation with the overall number of security forces, which is 290,000 policemen and soldiers, these incidents are kind of isolated incidents. They are serious and they cause damage, and we need to say better in terms of vetting, in terms of biometric enrollment, in terms of training, in terms of talking to the elders in their communities, etc., etc. And we have made progress in this. But by the way, there is no alternative. We need to carry on this partnering concept, because there is no other option in order to enable the Afghan forces for transition. So it's still a very, very small number, although the individual case might be disturbing.
Yeah. General, my final question is that did you see any type of the involvement of the Al-Qaeda people with helping the Taliban to organize some of these sophisticated attacks in Afghanistan?
There is certainly a connection between Al-Qaeda and Taliban. I cannot go into more detail because it's a question of operational security, but I can assure you that we carry on our fight against Al-Qaeda and Taliban. Although Osama bin Laden is dead, there is still terrorism in the area. There is still border-crossing terrorism between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we will certainly continue our fight, and we will not accelerate, for example, transition because Osama bin Laden is dead. We need to look at the conditions on the ground wherever we start transition, in certain areas like Bamiyan and Panjshir and other places, and then we take it from there. There is still a threat because of a combination and coordination between those groups.
Yeah. Thank you very much, General, for your time.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Thank you.